Hi everyone, my name is Shrushti Jayant Deshmukh. So in this video clip, I will take you through my thought process and how I tried to attempt the General Studies paper 2, and the paper I have chosen is the one that I attempted last year in 2018 mains examination. So one by one I will take you through the questions and share with you my own insights of what came to my mind at that moment and how I tried to handle that question. Since we are beginning the General Studies paper 2, there is one thing I would like to tell you in advance. The thing is that GS2 is about the polity, the constitution and areas around it. So it's better if you are able to quote the article from the Constitution of India which is relevant to what is being asked. For example, we will take up questions and I will illustrate there how I mentioned the article just in the introduction to give a sense that I was aware where this is placed in the Indian Constitution. The second thing is, there is a document by Niti Aayog called the 3-year action agenda. Now that document covers in detail about so many things about urbanization, energy security, environment, governance. So a lot of topics of General Studies paper 2 and 3 are covered there in a lot of detail. So please you can read that document and it will enrich your answers with a lot of data and keywords. Moving now to the question, taking question number 1. In the light of recent controversy regarding the use of electronic voting machines, what are the challenges before the Election Commission of India to ensure the trustworthiness of elections in India? अब ये सवाल ऐसा है कि हमें context दिया है कि EVM में controversy हुआ है. That's only the context, but that's not the question. The question is challenges before the EC. Challenges before EC, Election Commission. So how I started in the introduction, I just quoted that in Article 324, you have the Election Commission mentioned, and there the powers are that superintendence and control of the election, conducting of election is there with the Election Commission of India. That is how I started. Then moving on directly, since it is a 10 marker, so you can't go into so much of details, you just have 150 words and 7 minutes. So directly going to the challenges. Now challenges towards the trustworthiness. So I divided my answer into a lot of challenges, like I took a political challenge. So I wrote how political parties are trying to question the credibility of the EVM or the Election Commission, the partiality, how politically it is being challenged. Then I took up the point of economic challenge of trustworthiness. Why economic? Because as and when the population is increasing and you need more manpower to manage elections to maintain its credibility. So that's again a challenge. Then demographic, again as I mentioned, the youngsters are increasing, the voters are increasing who are now coming of age. So that's again a challenge for maintaining the trustworthiness. Then security challenge. There are some incidences of booth rigging, or like earlier we had this ballot papers, there were instances of ballot papers being destroyed or taken away. So some security challenges are there in front of EC. Then one more that came to my mind at that moment was technological challenges. Technological in two contexts. One was social media. Because of social media, spreading of fake news is very easy, right? So anybody can defame the EC and it can somehow malign the trustworthiness of it. So this is again a challenge for the Election Commission, that it should not be swayed by the fake news that is being spread on social media. And other technological thing we can talk about is how that different hacking is also going on, new cyber security, hackers are coming up and they might end up somehow, despite the fact that our EVMs are, they are independent standalone machines, but still the entire setup, the entire thing needs to be also updated along with the technology. So those are the challenges. But I'd also say one thing here, even if the fact that question does not ask you specifically about the solutions, you should be mentioning some or the other positive line at the end of your answer. Don't leave it like very dark thing that all problems and you don't know what to do. Try and include some or the other positive points, either that have already happened or which can happen, or you can use that measure. So I here mentioned the At the end of the answer, I mentioned how VVPAT, the voter verified paper audit trail, is now being there, how the Supreme Court says that a certain percentage of the papers are to be counted absolutely. Then I also mentioned how citizen awareness is being created, how EC also organized a kind of a seminar and asked the political parties, to send their representatives and try and hack the EVM. That was like an open challenge that EC put up in front of the country, and nobody has ever been able to hack the machine. So these are initiatives that have been taken, and you also know that the Election Commission of India is like a model for so many countries in Africa and in Asia who are trying to conduct free and fair elections. So that is a positive point in the field of EC. Coming to the next question. Whether National Commission for National Commission for Scheduled Caste, the NCSC, can enforce the implementation of constitutional reservation for the scheduled caste in the religious minority institution. Examine. Now, this is the question that was, it's a little convoluted, it's like covers a lot of aspects. What they are asking is, they are asking, can NCSC, the body, Article 338, which can it implement reservation policy for the SCs in religious minority institutions? So a kind of a question that covers a lot of aspects. And since it was coming from current affairs, because there were some issues with regard to the status of Aligarh Muslim University as a minority institution or not. There was a case pending in the Supreme Court, there was a Allahabad High Court judgment some years back. So this was somehow in news. So what I did, I first wrote a little bit about National Commission for Scheduled Caste, which article it is mentioned. And since the question is whether or not NCSC can do it, so I tried to list out the powers of NCSC. It's like a civil court. It has the power to summon and it has the power to investigate cases. But I also mentioned here that their powers are, they have to present a report in front of the president. But all of this is recommendation in nature. It is not going to be mandatory, it's going to be recommendatory in nature. So that's where the answer might come in. Then I also tried to touch upon what are religious minority institution and how they are mentioned in Article 30. So I tried to open up that perspective of religious minority institution. And since this issue is already being debated, you don't have to take one or the other side. You just have to give an overview of both the sides, and you can conclude safely that constitutionally whatever High Court or Supreme Court concludes in this regard will be taken as a course. Coming to the next question, under what circumstances can the financial emergency be proclaimed by the President of India? Second part, what consequences follow when such a declaration remains in force? So, this question is very straightforward in nature. You rarely get such straightforward questions, but this is one of that nature. It says, what circumstances can the financial emergency be proclaimed in, and what consequences? So, very simple, very straightforward on that front. If you have read Polity section, emergency section, you can just say what is financial emergency. Article 360, it's coming up here, and then what circumstances, so what conditions. You can divide the answer into two equal parts, give equal weightage to what conditions and what consequences. So first you can cover what conditions, then you can cover consequences. In what conditions, the same, that the credit position of the country is not good, or there is some financial stability is threatened. So in these conditions, if the President feels fit, then the financial emergency is imposed. And some other things that we talk about in emergency, that whether or not it needs to be approved. So no, it doesn't have to be approved every time. Once within 2 months it has to be approved, and there is no time duration, there is no time limit for financial emergency. This could be mentioned in this section. Then coming to the second part, the consequences, you can just say that the financial propriety, the center or the President of India can advise the states on maintaining the spirit of financial propriety. There could be reduction in the salary of officers and even of the judges of the High Court and Supreme Court, and also finally the one other consequence is that the bills for the grants, that the budget, that could be put into consideration of the President. I mean, that could be taken up by the President for consideration, and until and unless he passes it, that might be held down. So this is a straightforward question that could be covered. Next is, why do you think the committees are considered to be useful for parliamentary work, and discuss in this context the role of the estimates committee. Now this is again a typical polity question which is straightforward. See, when we read polity, we read the part of parliamentary committees, what are the different committees, how many members are there, and now they are just asking what is the relevance of that, how important is it. So what I did, I just first mentioned that since India is a parliamentary democracy, we are having different committees. I just named a couple of committees, and for example the estimates, the parliamentary accounts committee, then you have departmental standing committees, you can have joint committee. So I just mentioned some of their names and considered why they are useful. I just gave a signpost why they are useful, and then I said okay, they have a, they entrust accountability on the executive, that could be one point. Another point could be that specialized deeper knowledge could be gained by the legislators, they could understand their domain knowledge. If for example an MP, MP is coming, he has an economist background, so he would be much aware about the budgets and stuff. So he can utilize that knowledge in policy making of the country. So and it's also kind of a training period for the MPs or MLAs, MPs, which they can gain an experience of how a government works. So these are the things how it is useful, and in this context the role of estimates committee. So I just mentioned that okay, estimates committee is there, it has got 30 members all from Lok Sabha, and they discuss about the demand for grants and whether or not the demand which is made, how much is it appropriate, that's also some of the areas which they see. But then I also you could mention this point, that after the budget has been passed, after that the role starts. So it's a bit of a negative side, that also you can mention, and you can also mention that this body is merely advisory in nature. Okay, so and there's proportional representation. So all of these factors could be mentioned. Coming to the next question, Comptroller and Auditor General, question 5, has a very vital role to play. Explain how this is reflected in the method and terms of his appointment, as well as the range of powers he can exercise. See, CAG is one constitutional body which is very favorite and which really comes up again and again in the UPSC paper. So please read it very carefully. CAG has a very vital role to play. This statement is given. Now that's just a statement. What has been asked is, explain how this is reflected. Please underline this keyword, how this is reflected in the method and terms of his appointment. So you have to talk about the method and terms of appointment, method and term of appointment, and find out how vital role जो है, what is given, vital role, वो कितना justify हो रहा है. ठीक है, so you can mention कि the article, which article for this, article 148 is there. So you can start with that. CAG article 148, the guardian of the public purse, or someone who looks after the accounts, audits the accounts of the state and the center. What are the basic responsibilities, the basic role of CAG could be mentioned in the introduction. Then on you can move on to how he or she is appointed. So a method, you can see he is appointed by the President, by letter under his hand and seal, and then his terms and conditions of service could be say ki his salary and allowances are charged with the Constitution of India, he is ineligible to work further in the government once he retires, and you can also mention that the term of service, the term that's 65 years or 6 years, That's the term for him to work. You can also mention the powers of CAG, okay, and in the context of powers, the question is explain how this is reflected. See, you can say ki he has got the power, he has got the constitutional power to audit the account of the Consolidated Fund of India and of the states, etc. All of the powers you can see, he has the power to decide how the accounts are submitted, all of that. But at the end, towards the end, you can also mention that the role of CAG in India is only of an auditor but not of the comptroller. You can give the example of the British CAG, where you know, if the CAG does not sign you know, the budget, it is not appropriate, it is not granted. So this power is not there with the CAG in the Indian context, and he has a ex post facto role. So after it has been made, then he will find out of the financial propriety. So this makes it a little less effective than the other counterpart. You can mention this up towards the conclusion and end your answer. Coming to the sixth question, policy contradictions among various competing sectors and stakeholders have resulted in inadequate protection and prevention of degradation to environment. Comment with relevant illustrations. See, when I saw this question, this particular sentence or phrase, protection and prevention of degradation, this reminded me of the directive principle of state policy. And we have a term with regard to environment even in our fundamental duties. So while I was starting this question to answer it, what I did was I just quoted this phrase and said that, you know, I quoted the DPSP and the fundamental duty in which there is a mention of environment protection. You know, since it is a question of polity, you should be quoting some of the other articles which you might find being related to your answer. So with related to environmental conservation, the DPSP and FD, I quoted the fundamental duty and then I started my answer. So they are asking about competing sectors. And then they are also asking you to comment with relevant illustrations. See, when you talk of illustrations, illustration means that you need to put up real life examples, what are happening around you. So on that, whatever came to my mind and thought in those moments, competing ministries or competing sectors or stakeholders, I was reminded of one example. It was in news at that moment that, you know, for extending the Delhi metro, a lot of trees are being felled and, you know, a lot of deforestation is happening. So that's a kind of a competing interest, because we need this for infrastructure, we need this because of urbanization, and the environment is being sacrificed for this. So this is one example of competing interest. Another example that came to my mind that moment was the competing interest between establishing an industry and you know, taking away the agricultural land or clearing the agricultural produce. So between industrialization or industrial units versus the agriculture. And because this again can be connected to the environment. Another thing that really you know, could be added, and I think I added that, was regarding the pollution part. How because of these industries we are, you know, abusing the environment like anything. There is air, water, soil, all kinds of pollution. So this is again a competing interest, that we do not have ways to discharge the harmful toxic chemicals and then we are harming ultimately the environment. So these are some of the competing sectors and some illustrations that I made. One more example that came to my mind was building dams for, you know, energy security and for agriculture. But again, when you build a dam, you have people who are being displaced, people who are getting unemployed, the submergence of land, and there is also harm to the biodiversity. It is a very big question right now in front of us. So this is another competing interest which example could be given. I concluded on a positive note that despite this, we have to manage both the things together. As much as we need development, we also need to ensure that environment is taken care of. Next question 7, appropriate local community level healthcare intervention is a prerequisite to achieve health for all in India. Explain. So, what they are asking you is just try to make a mind map of what is being asked. When I saw this question, I will tell you what came to my mind. I just felt that they are asking us to achieve health for all, okay, but they have not left us free. So, they are telling us, the UPSC is telling us that you have appropriate local community level healthcare intervention. So, they are trying to achieve health for all from local level, community level intervention, alright. So, this is the circle focus of our answer, which should be. Oftentimes what happens is we read some key term and we feel that we can construct our answer around it, but please see what is being asked. They are just asking you the local level community intervention and it is a 150 word answer. So, you do not have much of space to elaborate. So, what are the local level things that were coming to my mind? I just thought health for all. Health for all means for children, for women, for elderly, senior citizens, then health for the Divyang, even health for the animals. The animal husbandry sector even comes in health for all, animal husbandry. So, but then we want to talk about the local level intervention, and the first that came to my mind was ASHA, in Anganwadi workers and ANMs, auxiliary nurse midwives. These are women and men who are working for children, and I also somehow mentioned that how they have worked for reducing the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate, how they are contributing to the program of ICDS, umbrella ICDS. Now it has happened, this thing. So, this is a local level intervention which is working in our country right now, okay. So, this is something which you can quote. Another thing that really came to my mind at that moment was socio-cultural interventions. Socio-cultural interventions which could be made. See, you do not have to talk about some grand scheme or some very grand thing, because they have specifically asked local level. So, social cultural interventions, you could have some SHG or anything, a group of women who are talking about the importance of nutrition. That could again be a step in the direction of health for all. You have the Ayushman Bharat program. In that you have a second segment where we are going to have health centers where even diseases like non-communicable diseases like diabetes or cancer, blood pressure would be treated in earlier, would be tracked earlier. So, those could be local level intervention that can help us achieve health for all, because now the nature of disease is also changing. We are moving away from malaria and stuff like that towards diabetes, cancer and blood pressure. So, that step also you can mention it in your answer. Another thing that really clicked at that moment was the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. This also is a local level intervention, because ultimately this will help you to achieve hygiene, construction of toilets and other such two-pit toilet or other such local level intervention that was being popularized, that will help you to generate hygiene, and that will help in health for all. So, these were some of the things that clicked in my mind at that moment. Moving to next question 8, it is about e-governance is not only about utilization of power of new technology, but also much about critical importance of the use value of information. Explain. See, this question is very much, I felt at that moment, I was just reminded of, see before we step into this question, there was one point that was left. In the last question, I made this little chart, I do not know, I was listening to something, I just made it at my home. So, you have a health worker, local health worker, you can train, you can first educate, train and employ. He or she could be the best person who could handle the local level intervention, right. So, this was something I had prepared while I used to study, and that I felt could be used here. So, try and make your own framework, some flow chart, some diagram which you can keep yourself ready with, and you can use it whenever you feel like. So, we took up the next question, which is e-governance. See, the focus of this question is e-governance is just a part. What they are trying to focus, see, e-governance is not only about utilization of the power of new technology, but also much about critical importance of the use value of information. See, I think I felt at that moment that they were hinting about some big data analytics thing. When you talk of use value of information, see, sometimes we have a lot of information, but it is not only about providing services. That same information could be utilized to do much more. I thought at that moment that the hint of the question is towards that, and what I did, so I just first of all started with defining e-governance, what it meant to me, how e-governance is the use of technology for the service delivery, and then I put up some of the schemes that are there. For example, you have the JAM Trinity Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile, which is there. You have a lot of e-NAM, that is e-National Agricultural Market. These are all examples of e-governance. Earlier you had the project Make Doot, which was there. You have the cloud infrastructure coming in government. All of these are initiatives of e-governance. So, I just somehow mentioned it first, and then I mentioned how that could be used, how it is being able to deliver services. For example, you have Aadhaar coming up. So, all of the information, citizen identification could be done here. Subsidies can be transferred to the accounts of the citizens directly. Loans could directly be given to their accounts, anything. So this is how was the first part of the answer. Coming to the second, the critical importance of the use value of information. There I mentioned this specifically, that use value means what? Use value means the same information or data which you are having, consider it to be the big data, and that could actually be utilized for other purposes apart from this. So, the information that you have collected, now the use value is is more important critically. For example, you can see trends in it, okay. You can do some geo mapping. For example, you have data about how many people are taking which kind of crop in agriculture this time. You have this data with you. That geo mapping could be used with can be used with the space thing, can connect with which crop is suitable for which area. This is all about the information which we have and how we can use it in innovative manners. So, I tried to mention whatever came to my mind at that moment. For example, there was this, I think there is a district in Haryana, I am not sure of the name. So, what they have done is they have tried to digitalize the land records, including a blockchain. So this could also be mentioned, how the land records could not only be used to ascertain who is the owner of the land, but the use value of the information is that it cannot be tampered with, because there is a lot of corruption that happens there. So corruption could be tamed if you have ascertained the name of the owner of the land. These are some of the points that came to my mind. Coming to the next question, question number 9. India's relations with Israel have, have of late acquired a depth and diversity which cannot be rolled back. Discuss. Now, this question in international relations was amongst the questions that was really expected, because the leader of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, had really come up, and there was a kind of a bonding between India and Israel. So, try and also preempt what are the hot topics on that in that year and what can be asked. So, in this there are two keywords if you focus in this question. One is depth and the other is diversity. So, you know, in depth you can, these are two words which you can really work on. First you can start with giving a broad overview of the India-Israel relations. So, I just started with a broad overview that how India-Israel relations have been developing, which year it was the diplomats were exchanged and how the offices were established. I mentioned that year, and that is how it started. Then I divided the question into depth and diversity. When you talk about depth, you know, it is about how deep in some particular areas, how deep it is going, and diversity is about the breadth. Okay, what are the different areas that are covered? When I thought about depth, I was reminded of that one word, you know, in some of the editorials that I used to read, I was time and again there was this word called de-hyphenation of the policy with regard to the Arab world. So, we had this confusion that if we would go to Israel, then we won't be able to balance our relations with the Arab Muslim world. So, that has been de-hyphenated. So, I mentioned that word, this de-hyphenation has been occurring, and India has, you know, India has been fine balancing the relations between both the things, and the pursuit of India is now its own self-interest, and trying to pursue its own self-interest by narrowly balancing the interest of other countries. This is the depth. And talking about diversity, you know, there are multiple areas in which India and Israel are cooperating. So, I mentioned those areas, like it could be space, military technology, you know, we have the Barak 8 missile, then other such interventions, like in case of cyber security, Israel is doing really good, that is an area. Then there is India-Israel cooperation for startups, that kind of an investment startup forum has also been formed. So, all of this I mentioned there. Coming to the next question, 10, a number of outside powers have entrenched themselves in Central Asia, which is a zone of interest to India. Now, discuss the implications in this context of India's joining the Ashgabat Agreement 2018. See, look at the question को आप देखेंगे कि शुरू उन्होंने सेंट्रल एशिया से किया, दे आर ट्राइंग टू गिव यू कि सेंट्रल एशिया में देर आर लॉट ऑफ पावर्स, ये आपको कॉन्टेक्स्ट दे दिया, पर क्वेश्चन वो नहीं है. क्वेश्चन ये है कि इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर इंडिया अशगाबाद एग्रीमेंट 2018 में जो उन्होंने ज्वाइन किया है, उसका इम्प्लीकेशन क्या पड़ने वाला है, क्या उसका इम्पैक्ट पड़ेगा, दैट इज़ द क्वेश्चन. एंड जनरली कभी भी अगर इम्प्लीकेशन का सवाल आता है, सो इट्स वे बेटर टू गिव अ मल्टी डायमेंशनल इम्पैक्ट. मतलब क्योंकि हर कोई भी एक्शन होता है, इट हैज़ अ मल्टी डिमेंशनल इम्पैक्ट ऑफ इट्स ओन, लॉट ऑफ एरियाज विल बी इम्पैक्टेड. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आई बिगन दिस क्वेश्चन बाय explaining what Ashgabat agreement really is, and I could not remember all the names of countries who were a part of it. So, I mentioned just a few that there is something called as an Ashgabat agreement, which India is now acceded to, and the other members like Pakistan and Iran and Uzbekistan and Oman and stuff, whatever I could remember among other countries. And then the question is about what are the implications for India. So, I straightforward jump to it since it is a 10 marker. What are the implications? So, a lot of implications joining the Ashgabat agreement. Since it is a connectivity agreement, we will be able to connect with the Central Asia. So, and you have a lot of energy sector requirements that can be fulfilled from Central Asia, whether it is oil or even nuclear energy. So, I think energy security could figure up in the very first thing, energy security. You could say that we can deepen our energy security with the Central Asian countries because of this. If the gates are opened, then you can mention, I mentioned it about for the trade perspective, service exports can happen. Since if you have deeper relations with the countries, you have multiple things that will open up, multiple avenues which will open up. In general, trade in goods and services both can get a boost. Other implications with regard to political implication also you can mention. See, since Central Asia is an area, and look at the question. Question had mentioned very clearly, a number of outside powers have entrenched themselves. What does this mean? That powers who don't belong to Central Asia or around have entrenched themselves. So, what came to my mind was United States and China is very close, but still China is trying to play a big role there. For example, the CPEC is just brings China close to the mouth of Pakistan. So, that could be one area where you can mention that politically it is very important for India, since countries like China etc. are also coming up here, and they are trying to, Europe etc., all of this are trying to utilize the Central Asian area, because it is relatively it is shielded from the terror tendencies that are there in West Asia. So, Central Asia has that kind of a little peaceful atmosphere. So, politically it is important for India to play a role there. That came to my mind, and I just concluded suitably that it will be very important. I also mentioned the INSTC, the International North-South Transport Corridor.